Test, test.
Fantastic.
Gotta love technology.
Blessing and a curse.
All right. Kim, do you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Okay. Mayday, Mayday. Welcome to the Colfax City Council special meeting of May 1st, 2024 is now in session. The Pledge of Allegiance will be read by any former sheriff that's in the room.
Don't all stand up at once now.
Stand up.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I read this or not?
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. City Clerk, would you please read the roll?
Councilmember Burris. Present. Councilmember Hilberg.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Loman.
Here.
Councilmember McCauley.
Here.
And Mayor Douglas.
Present. Now's the time for public comment.
This is the time for public comment for items that are not on today's agenda. So if you have something out of left field you'd like to talk about, this is the time. If it has nothing to do with sewer rate studies, this is the time for that public comment. Absolutely, you can.
Start the timer.
I'm representing the VFW.
Sorry.
I'm representing the VFW, and we're having an art show on Friday from 4 to 9 up at the VA Hall. I have 10 artists that have kindly donated original works, all the way from oils, pastels, watercolors, ceramics. And this is to benefit the veterans. We help them out when there are things that the VA can't do for them. So it's 4 to 9, it's free entrance, we'll have hors d'oeuvres, no host bar, and you can meet the artist. And we will have what you call a silent auction on those works, and they will benefit the veterans. So please be there May 3rd, Friday, 4 to 9. Thank you.
That's this Friday, a couple days from now.
Yes.
Any other public comment? Hi, Tim Moran. I'm with Colfax Chamber of Commerce, and tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock at the depot, the Chamber of Commerce office museum, we have coffee and conversation, and our guest speakers are going to be from NID, and just because of the issues that are going on water-wise up in Spalding Lake area and how they're going through repairing all that. We should have some good conversation and some good questions and answers. So that's tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Thanks, Tim.
Diane Green, in Auburn Interfaith Food Closet is going to be here in Sierra Vista, right? Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, I don't know the date. I think it's another date. Anyway, 7th. Okay, thanks, honey. From noon to 3. So anybody that you know that might need help, just send them over.
Thank you. Any other public comment? And just a reminder, I think the snacks are for everybody. So this will probably be about a 3-hour meeting, so you might want to grab some snacks.
A lot of rocks from the board. He's got a mile.
Okay. If there's no more public comment, I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Tonight's workshop is on the sewer rate study, and we have Catherine Hansford and Shailene Rollins from Hansford Economic Consulting to give a presentation.
And real quick, before she gets started, I just want to preface the conversation, with where we're going on this tonight. Luckily, we have our lovely experts here who can give, a lot of really detailed answers to a lot of questions and really help people understand the complexity of this process. But I think it's really important that we all understand that a big part of what we're here to do tonight and what the whole purpose of what we're enacting here is to put a limit on the rate increases for the next 5 years. So I want to make sure that we have that context in our conversation tonight, that when we're talking about these numbers, we're talking about putting limits on the increases. So just because we select numbers tonight does not mean that these are infatuated increases that will occur. They still have to be reviewed every year. They're not automatically in place. These are limits. So with that being said, I'll get off my soapbox and pass it over.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Shana, would you like to start the presentation? Thank you. All right. Just a quick note there. You don't need to go back. Just a quick note there to say the report is a draft final report at this time. So all numbers are draft that are presented until that final report is complete at the end of the public hearing. Okay. So we're going to start out tonight, Ron and myself, city manager and myself, with a little bit of background just about the wastewater system itself before I go into information on the financials. And I thought it would be really helpful to put the wastewater system in context with all of the city's assets that you own. The city owns assets like City Hall, recreational facilities, I'm sure, other types of facilities. And in total, that's $41 million worth of assets on your books. The wastewater system makes up almost 70% of that. All of the other city functions combined are about 30%. So if you think about it, the wastewater system and what you have to protect and look after and ensure that the city has good sewer service into the future, that's a very large part of the city's functions. And of that wastewater system and those assets, almost, most of it, so 93% of it is in the treatment plant. And about 7% of it is in the pipes that convey that sewer to the wastewater treatment plant. So just try and put things in perspective of how big of an asset the wastewater system is to the city. Thank you. And while I'm talking about the costs of assets and the infrastructure, I just want to touch here, and I do go into in a little bit more depth. Just to start out with some of the large projects that are going on currently with the wastewater system, and some that. Give it a second.
Put on our notes and put the direction fans on.
Yeah.
But we're in there. That's helping. Yeah.
All right, so the city has two very large projects that are underway currently. The city has been very, very proactive in seeking grants from the state. So these top two projects in this table, it's an inflow and infiltration mitigation project and an algae reduction project. Those together make almost $10 million worth of projects that are underway right now that the state is funding. In addition to that, within the next 5 years, the city sees the need for about another $1.6 million worth of repair, rehabilitation work to keep everything in good order. So of the about $11.4 million worth of projects that are either underway now or are anticipated to happen in the next 5 years, about 10 million of that is being grant funded. So the city really has been working very hard to find grant funding and not to have to put that burden on its customers. And a little bit about the wastewater that's generated here in Colfax. In total, city treats about 250,000 gallons a day. Most of the customer base is residential, so about 70% of the total flow going to the plant that's being generated by residential customers, about 20% from commercial customers and about 9% from institutional customers. And I'm going to pass the mic over to City Manager.
Okay, on this slide, we're going to start discussing some of the mechanical works and some of the treatment processes. Before I start, we have Devin Morris, our Chief Plant Operators, in the back room. Stand up, Devin, for a second. If you have any highly technical questions about how the system works, please ask him afterwards. Thanks, Devin. So this unit sits on the headworks. This is where all the sewer comes in from the city. And the silver unit is a bar screen. So it separates out trash, paper, anything that could clog up the system as it goes through, puts it in a little dumpster right there. Next slide, please. Oops. They're in a different order. All right. So we'll go in a little different direction. This is a UV system. And so the UV system uses ultraviolet light. It's a disinfection system. We disinfect, we don't sterilize. To sterilize would cost ungodly amounts of money. So the state is happy with disinfection. So the UV disinfection system transfers electromagnetic energy from a mercury arc lamp to the organism's genetic material, the DNA and RNA. When this radiation penetrates the cell wall of the organism, it destroys the cell's ability to reproduce. So again, we're not removing all the bacteria, but we are making them so they can't reproduce, so they're harmless as they enter back into nature. Next slide. This is a filtration system. So after the flow goes through the activated sludge system, where the microbes do their work, the clear water is separated out. It is ran through this filtration system, and that takes out any debris before it goes to the UV system and then discharged. Next slide. This unit is a solids press. So as we separate the water from the solids in the treatment system, some of the solids need to be removed to create a balance. So think of the activated sludge system as basically alive. It's filled full of microbes. You can't have microbes that are too young, too old, and too many. So we separate them out, and as we separate them out, we run them through this filtration press, and it separates the water from the solids, squishes most of the water out of it, gets you down to probably 17-19% solids, and from there it ends up in a dumpster and goes to the landfill. Next slide, please. This is a holding pond. The system itself cannot process all the water that comes into it at one time. The I&I project, which is going to keep, that we're working on right now, should keep a lot of the extra rainwater and groundwater from entering the system. So that will help with capacity. So anytime we have more flow coming into the plant than it can treat at one time, it gets diverted into a pond. And then when the flow slows down enough, we'll bring the water back from the pond and treat it from there. So that's what all the big ponds are doing out there. Next slide. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, we didn't show the treatment plant, but okay. All right, thank you.
Okay. All right. Next slide, please. Okay. The wastewater fund is a separate enterprise fund of the city. Enterprise funds are created for what are called business type activities. And they're called business type activities because they are intended to pay for themselves. The sewer fund is not funded by the discretionary revenues that the city receives from things like sales taxes and property taxes. It has to pay for itself entirely from the rates that are charged and grants that it receives, maybe some interest income and occasional miscellaneous other revenues, but it has to be a very self-sufficient fund. This fund is exclusive for wastewater service. And as I had mentioned before, the city does aggressively pursue grants. But 98% of the wastewater system annual costs in a typical year are supported by wastewater rates. Well, in the last few years, the wastewater fund has been financially strong. It needs to be financially strong because it is subject to large cash outflows, millions of dollars, in terms of millions of dollars at cash outflows. And it must maintain strong reserves for repair and rehabilitation and for potential emergency events. I had talked about the state providing the grant monies, and that's wonderful. But when the state provides grant monies, the city has to pay to the contractors first, and then it receives reimbursements back from the state. So the city could be out $1 million+ while it's waiting for reimbursements in the course of a year. So it's really important that the strong reserves are kept. Also, I've been helping other special districts recently that have been struggling with the aftermath of fires. And so that's another thing to think about is natural disasters and ensuring that the city's in a good financial position if there were to be some kind of natural disaster, and a fire is probably the most obvious of them. Again, if you have strong reserves, you'll be able to weather the event. And then there are certain grant funds that can help you to rebuild later. But again, it's a reimbursement type of situation. The operating costs, they're paid for with rates, and the capital costs are paid for with a combination of rates, connection fees, and grants. And just to clarify it a little bit, operating costs are things like paying for staff, paying for supplies, trucks, cell phones, all the types of equipment that are necessary to run the system from day to day. When we talk about capital costs, we're talking about actual infrastructure costs, usually something that costs more than about $5,000. So that would include some of the components that city managers just showed you there on the slides. And rates pay for the rehabilitation or replacement of assets that provide the capacity to serve the customers that are here today. And the connection fees pay for the increased capacity and new assets to serve new customers. What we're talking about today is just rates. We're not addressing the connection fees. The purpose of the rate study is first and foremost revenue sufficiency. The city must operate the wastewater system over the next 5 years, disposing of the wastewater safely while meeting all regulatory requirements for the residents and businesses in Colfax. Second, to fund the CIP. CIP means those capital improvement projects I talked about. There's about $1.6 million of projects that have been identified that are needed over the next 5 years. To ensure adequate reserves, I mentioned it's so important for the city to have robust reserves. I already said while waiting for those grant-funded reimbursements and to provide those funds for emergencies. And finally, the city does have a financial agreement obligation through the loan with the state that was for the improvements to the wastewater treatment plant. And there's particular obligations associated with that restricts cash and requires that a certain amount of revenue be coming in each year above your operating costs. So those are the goals of the rate study, but California also has a few other requirements. So the California Constitution also requires that there are 5 things that are demonstrated through the rate study. First of all, that the revenues from the fee shall not exceed the funds required to provide the service. This is not, the enterprise fund is not in the business of making profit. It is a business type activity, but it does not have a profit motive. Second, that the revenues from the fee shall not be used for any purpose other than that for which it was imposed. These rates are collecting money for the wastewater system only. The city is not going to be diverting these funds for recreation activities and so forth. Third, the amount of the fee imposed as an incident of property ownership shall not exceed the proportional cost of service to the parcel. So groups of customers are treated in the same way. We're not trying to demonstrate how much service each individual property owner is receiving. And the way the city does this is through an EDU cost allocation. EDU is an equivalent dwelling unit, and I am going to explain that a little bit more here in a moment. Fourth, that no fee may be imposed for service unless that service is being used or is immediately available to the parcel. And finally, that no fee may be imposed for general government services. You can think of police, fire, and library, where the service is available to the public at large in much the same manner as to the parcels charged the fee. So again, it just really is being very specific that this money is being collected for wastewater service only. There's no profit being generated, and that we are meeting a cost of service requirement. This slide is to show how there are multiple objectives that the city is trying to achieve as it sets its rates. I said first and foremost is revenue sufficiency, ensuring there's enough money to run the system. It's always a goal to try and keep a rate structure simple and logical, that if there's any changes made in a rate structure, that it's compatible with the utility billing system, that it signals the value of the service being received, and that it supports the city goals. So these are all the things thinking about when doing a cost of service study. And there are financial health criteria also built into the rate study. There are 3 financial health criteria, and they are based on guidelines provided by the Government Finance Officers Association. First, that the city will maintain a general operating cash reserve in the wastewater fund of at least 75% of operating expenses. That's to allow for cash flow needs. Second, that there should be a minimum of $950,000 kept in restricted and designated reserves. That means they have a specific purpose to cover, I use the term here SRF, but that's state revolving fund. That's the state's loan reserve requirement of $439,000. As long as you have that loan, $439,000 has to sit in an account. It can't be touched. You can use it for your last loan payment. And then at least $500,000 for capital expenses. If there's some kind of emergency, these kinds of expenses are large, very large. And so 500,000 at least could get you going if you have to take out a loan to complete the entire repair. And then third, that each year the net operating income will exceed the debt service by at least 1.25. And that enables the city to stay in a good financial standing. It enables it to obtain other loans if necessary. There are no additional loans proposed in this rate study. This pie chart shows the wastewater fund operating expenses in a typical year. Personnel, staffing costs are almost 50% of the costs. That might sound high, but actually it's very common for wastewater systems. a large part of the operating costs are the people doing the work, and they are highly skilled, qualified people. They have to undergo many licensing requirements to do these jobs. So 47% is a very typical number. Supplies and equipment, about 16%, and professional services, communications equipment and bills, and other costs make up the remaining amount. This fee study presents 3 different fee level alternatives for the rates. Alternative 1 would have annual increases of 4%. Oh, I should say up to annual increases of 4%. In this model, the rates increase, but there's no more collection for system rehabilitation. So for the last few years, the city has been collecting money for system rehabilitation and rates. And that means it's putting aside money into these designated reserve funds, which means it's going for a special purpose. That special purpose is to replace worn out equipment as needed. But the city has built up a sufficient cash reserve at this point, barring anything really just really terrible happening. So under this alternative, that collection for system rehabilitation stops, but the total cash balance is projected to increase up to about 500,000. That will be from state reimbursement money, as well as having some new connections on the system. Under alternative 2, there will be annual rate increases of up to 3% per year. Again, there's no rates being collected over the next 5 years for system rehabilitation purposes. And by the end of the 5-year period, it's projected that the total cash balance would be about the same as it was at the end of fiscal year 23, which means June 30th, 2023. Under alternative 3, there are annual increases of up to 2%. Under this alternative, the revenue requirements, so the amount that's needed each year, is not fully funded with the rates, and cash reserves are drawn down on to pay for a portion of the capital project costs, and about $155,000 would be drawn down over the next 5 years to pay for those capital costs. I've got a few graphs to illustrate these different what might happen under alternative 1. So this is the up to 4% increase each year. The black line that goes along horizontally, that is the revenue that's received right now by the city. So no rate increase. The revenue requirement, that's the gray bars. That's the amount of money that the city needs to bring each year to pay for its operations costs, to pay for its debt service, and to pay for more of the the smaller capital outlay, plus the 5-year CIP of the 1.6 million, which is spread out amongst those 5 years. The green bars show the increased rates revenue at that up to 4% a year level. So what you can see here is that the increased rate revenues are a little bit higher than what's needed in some years, and it's a little bit lower than what's needed in other years. So it just depends on how much money the city has to spend on those capital projects in a year. But over the full 5-year period under alternative 1, all those the revenue requirements for each of those years is being met with the rates. Okay. I want to talk about a few major assumptions in the rate structure. First of all, that there's no change proposed to the rate structure. There are some different types of rate structures for wastewater systems, but the EDU structure has actually been proven to be an equitable structure, and it is a very appropriate structure for smaller systems. And you would be classified as a smaller system. You don't have any industrial customers, and your customers have similar wastewater strength, meaning that when it gets to the treatment plant, it needs about the same amount of biological effort to treat it. All those customers who have paid connection fees per EDU and they're ready to receive, the city's ready to receive the wastewater flow from everyone who's paid the connection fees per EDU. So no change to the rate structure. In terms of growth, excuse me, the projection is to continue with the historical trend of 3 EDUs per year. We've not made any assumption that some large development's going to come in. So we're trying to keep it on a more conservative projection. And then as far as a potential Shady Glen consolidation, there is a grant-funded feasibility study that's planned to occur. And that has been accounted for just in terms of cash flow. So the city again would likely have to lay out some money for the feasibility study, but it would be reimbursed from the state. But we have not included any actual construction taking place for a potential Shady Glen consolidation. So I just want to make that clear. And as I had said before, there is no new debt. Thank you. No new debt that is incorporated into this rate model. I wanted to address a little bit what an EDU fee structure is. It has been defined in the city's ordinance, 475, as the average wastewater discharge from a single family dwelling unit. 1 EDU is considered to generate domestic wastewater carrying minimal to moderate load of non-hazardous contaminants, such as common household cleaning and maintenance products. The number of EDUs that a customer has is assigned by the city at the time of application for service, and it depends on the intended uses of the property. The number of EDUs are reviewed upon change in a building use and or application for building alternatives. So it is possible that the EDUs at a property could change over time if the use changes at that property. This graph shows the projected cash balances for the wastewater fund and the components of the cash balances. This is under alternative 1, which is the up to 4% annual increase each year. And I think what I want to point out here is that in the next fiscal year, it is anticipated that the city's cash reserves will dip. And that's because of all those projects that are taking place right now. The city is going to be continuing to draw down on the reserves to ensure those projects are completed. And then from fiscal year 26, 7, 8, 9, the city's reserves will bounce back as the reimbursements come in. The yellow is that debt service reserve. I had mentioned the $439,000 that the city can't touch. It just has to put it aside, keep it there. The blue is the restricted or designated reserves. And that means that it's put aside for specific purpose. As I said, that's capital expenditures. And then the green is the general operating cash, ensuring that there's enough to at least have that 75% of expenses each year. Okay. So the revenue requirement is a term that gets used in a rate study. What it means is it's the amount of money that's needed each year to pay for operations and expenses and maintenance costs, for capital improvements, for system rehabilitation, for debt service, and to be keeping money aside for prudent reserves. Under the 4% up to 4% increase each year, the current and this is the monthly fee per EDU. So most homes have 1 EDU. Most single family residences are 1 EDU. So currently you're paying $143.07 per month, and that would increase then each year. And at the end of the 5-year period, that would be at $174.06 a month. And I wanted to show this to provide, this is the cash balances. I've already shown you a projection of the cash balances, but this takes the last few years into account too. And I wanted to show this to you because in 2021, 2022 to 2023, you can see that cash balance increasing. That's because that's deliberate. The city had been putting money aside from the rates to pay for system rehabilitation. 2024 and 2025, here you see the city drawing down on those reserves to pay for these large projects. And then the bounce back in 2026 through 2029. The reason why it goes down a little bit there from 2028 to 2029 is because of a capital project that's taking place in that year. And this graph is getting at the same thing. The blue line is what was the cash balance at the beginning of 2024. That's July 1 of 2023. And so it shows you that under alternative one, the up to 4% rate increase, those dark bars, you can see at the end of 2025, the cash balance is drawn down, it pops back up, and it would be a little bit higher at the end of the 5-year period than when you started out at the beginning of the fiscal year in 2024. Under alternative two, it would be pretty much projected to be pretty much the same. And then under alternative three, that's where the city is drawing down on some of its reserves to pay for capital costs. Okay. And this is a comparison graph showing the difference in what the rates will be. This is for one EDU per month under each of the three alternatives. So, yeah, go to the next one. All right, so that's the presentation of the methodology and the calculated rates. I do want to explain to you that as customers, you do have the right to protest the proposed rates. Every property owner has the right to protest. The instructions for how to do that have been included on the Proposition 218 notice that you should have all received in the mail. Only one protest can be counted per parcel. So if you have a landowner and you have a tenant, if you both want to protest the rates, you can both send in a protest, but only one of them will be counted legally. The protest must be mailed or otherwise physically submitted in handwriting to the city. Electronic submittals are invalid. That's the law. And a valid protest will be counted if received by close of the public hearing. And it includes the customer's name, must be able to read it, the address or the assessor parcel number of the property so we can identify it, a statement of the rates being protested, and a signature and date of the protest. Upon close of the public hearing, the protests are counted. If 50%, actually plus one, of the owners of public record protest, then the city cannot proceed. But absent a majority protest, the city can proceed with adoption of maximum rates. At any time in the next 5 years, the city can freeze or reduce the rates shown on the notice, but it cannot increase them without another Proposition 218 public noticing process. So these are maximum rates. Okay. After the rates have been adopted, any challenge has to be filed within 120 days of the effective date or date of final passage, adoption, or approval of the resolution adopting the wastewater rates. So there is a period of time after adoption that you can challenge it, but it is a limited period of time. So that concludes our presentation. I do want to inform you that we do have a frequently asked questions sheet, and it has a QR code that you can scan and get more information. That's on this desk here. The city has more information on the website and on the back bench. Shailene, do you want to stand up for a second? Yeah, oh, that works too. If you would like to be contacted, if you have questions, you want more information, if you could write down your name and email address, or telephone number, then that would be helpful. Then the city would be able to get back to you. Oh, sorry. In one moment, absolutely, one moment. Okay, so this is my final slide, I think, actually. Yes, no, I think it is. Very, very quickly then, just moving on from today, the public workshop, the public hearing date is May 22nd. And then the new rates would actually come into effect on July 1 of 2024.
Now you're ready for questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Great presentation. Thank you.
So yes, any questions?
When you have this reserve money that's sitting there only for a specific project, is this money making interest or is it just sitting there doing nothing?
Yes, it is making interest. The city does have investments. It puts it in very secure government funds and it does earn interest, yes.
My other question, with the expansion of the hotel being here and now new subdivisions coming in, which is adding more and more, flow to our sewers. Is that impacting the people that are already here and living here? Because when I moved here in 2002 with a new home, it was $117 including garbage every 2 months. Then it went to $128 including garbage 3 years later. And then now we're at $286. I live in a home by myself. And that doesn't include garbage anymore. And with everything else going up, I mean, this is really, most people in my neighborhood are retired or young families, and this is a lot of money. And it just seems like it's, given all of these new homes and projects that are coming in, causing more flow than the sewer can handle, then these projects shouldn't happen in this area if we can't afford it.
I think there's a couple things you've touched on here that are really important, and I want to make sure everyone understands now that we're in the workshop part of this, we should be having a free-flowing casual conversation, and anybody feel free to grab a mic and participate in this. You touched on a couple things. One, when you first moved here, what year was that, if you don't mind me asking? Okay, so this was before the total collapse of our sewer rate structure. And one of the things that came out of that experience and that leak and that required mitigation from the state coming in was the complete rebuild of the sewer system, which created a much larger system than what our citizens at that time were prepared to fund. So we actually had more capacity available than what we were servicing. So some of these new projects, one of the things that they've contributed to us is they've created more ratepayers that have been able to contribute to those services and actually use the capacity on the system that was being unused at that time. So it has prevented additional increases in the rates that we would like to avoid by divvying the pie up among more people. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize.
8% increase for the last 20 years, so how is that not?
Well, you might have noticed the very substantial jump in price around 2008. Which is when the sewer was required to be entirely rebuilt.
Right.
And when that happened, we were put with a system that had far more capacity than what our citizens needed. And an $8 million bill to go with it. So now having these additional people join into paying for that debt is assisting in us trying to prevent further increases that are coming with the increased operation cost.
Had a 20-year increase at 3%. I thought that this would be done, I mean, how far is it gonna go? I mean. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
and that's that, I'm right there with you. I mean, I think that one of the things that every one of us need to acknowledge is that we're also ratepayers on this and very, very unhappy. And one of the things that I'd like to be able to see us do is actually hit the pause button on the rate increases. And we've made some very, very substantial efforts in that regard, like with our sewer, the solar plant that we put out there to stop about $200,000 a year worth of electric bills. We've done quite a lot of I&I work that's come from grant funding, millions of dollars to take that away from our reserve funds. We've done a lot of work in the last 5 years to try to deviate other monies towards the system to prevent rate increases. But I'm going to be very blunt, inflation is not our friend right now. And I have to say thank you all for your flexibility with my children here tonight. This is one of the things about being a glorified volunteer, which is what we as council members are. This is cutting into that time where we're normally home with our families, and some of us have young children. I appreciate you guys being patient with my young children here tonight. We appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for being here. All of you. I know everybody's trying, and it is just really sad that it's expensive. If we were stopped here, because my thought, I said to you guys,
Yeah.
okay, now that we're at 20 years, is it gonna go back down?
Right.
And they're like, what? You know, they just stopped here. I mean, it's bad, but it's just, it's wrong.
And I think one of the things too that, one of these slides, I'm not sure that it came up on here, but you can actually find it in the printout packets that are available throughout the room on page 33. You can see the comparison for wastewater bills for other homes in other parts of the area. Specifically when we start looking at like Lake of the Pines. I think that's a pretty striking number, $197 a month just for wastewater treatment services. When we look at, not just Lake of the Pines, but Lake Wildwood is right now going through a whole catastrophe of their own with their wastewater treatment system. They're basically going to be forced to go through the same type of mitigation we were forced to go through in 2008. I don't want to ever say we were lucky to go through that when we went through it, because it was a horrible experience for us and we're still living with it. But at the end of the day, the fact that we got to do that at a time when the economy had construction prices where they were, we are very fortunate, because the price to do the mitigation we had to do then to do it now is astronomical by comparison. And some of these other jurisdictions are going to be dealing with even more heartache than we are, which is saying something as an impoverished community as we are. And feel free to stand up, move around. I have a herniated disc, so I won't be doing a lot of sitting. No one else needs to feel like we need to be highly formalized and sitting behind anywhere you don't want to.
What other discussion is there to find them? What other ideas have been generated to see where additional income could help offset the cost of this?
Somebody needs to win lotto.
Yeah,
It's not going to be
I
me.
bought 2 tickets.
I win nothing. So,
I mean,
but I will take donations. I'm just curious, like what other aspects have been.
Well, I'm hoping some of my other council members can jump in here at any point, because there's been a lot of work done.
yes, so the big grant money that we've won from the grants has helped offset the construction costs and repair costs. But they don't have grants for everyday running of the system. It's just for large construction projects. But we have been very lucky in millions of dollars of the grant.
Another thing we're trying to do is get more development into Colfax, some more residential housing, more people to share the burden. The more houses we have, we do have the capacity for it, and we have the ability to treat more wastewater. So the more we can add to the system, the better, because more people will pay for it. A big thing is reducing costs too. So like Trinity had said, the solar project, perfecting our treatment processes and procedures, taking care of leaks and other issues, being proactive, having a great staff that knows what they're doing and able to run the plant efficiently, saves a lot of money. So it's more cost cutting and trying to find creative ways to make stuff run well for the money we have, as opposed to being able to find more revenue coming in without getting more development.
And you guys have been a big part of that solution. Grant funding is a big part of this, both for construction projects and otherwise. And one of the things that we've been going through lately is just trying to get money from the state. And there has been several times where we've had grant money dangled in front of us like a carrot on a stick. And it has taken a lot of tenacity and basically harassment by your council members, your staff, and you guys as the general public. There's probably been several times recently, you can remember me getting out there on social media and begging you guys to write letters and call people, and it's been very effective. Just getting that money released to us so that we are able to continue with these projects.
I'm curious, for the council, which tier are you proposing?
So what we're proposing is a little bit different for each of us, if I'm being totally frank with you. I think in general, we have agreed, and I apologize for the noise from my children. I have very little control over this situation right now. I will be right back, and I'm gonna let these guys answer.
Yeah.
One of the things that we really took very seriously into consideration in this conversation is when we look at what happened to Paradise and what we look at what has happened to other local jurisdictions that have been impacted by fire recently or other natural disasters, when they don't have the ability to recoup funds in order to deal with a natural emergency, they are not in a position where they can then operate without bankrupting the town and potentially releasing all local control with a massive tax burden back onto the parcels. So we have had a couple of different conversations about this. I think generally what we're hoping to be able to do is put a limitation in place at the 4%, but every year be able to independently assess that rate and hopefully come in with no increase or up to 2% increase and keep it as conservative as possible, reserving that maximum amount for the opportunity where it's necessary and absolutely necessary at that. I don't think anybody here has any desire to implement a 4% increase unless there is a glaring need to do so.
Well, I'll throw it.
I think you may have answered it, but and maybe you said it and I missed it, but is there some point where we're looking at not having this incredible increase? It's just an ongoing.
That we look at coming to maturity on our loan in 2039. Yeah, 2039.
So the loan payment is done in 2039. So there is an end in sight, and remember that loan payment is on a 1% interest, so nobody can compete with that. And no, I'm sorry, there's no grants that will pay off the loan.
And it's
not
no
going to work that way.
inflation.
We have to pay it off. But in a perfect universe, when that's done, everybody's rates would drop for what that payment would be. And I can't predict the future, but that would be a perfect universe situation with it.
I mean, look at what's happening with inflation, and costs for construction materials are up 30 to 50%. Labor's up an incredible amount, more than 4%. So trying to keep rates at 4% maximum raise on this was kind of the best solution we could come up with without leaving the city at the possibility of coming up short. It doesn't mean that rates have to be at 4%, but and hopefully with the solar project coming online, we can evaluate what our actual savings are there and be able to bring that back to the ratepayer, because that's going to be a huge chunk of our monthly operating expenses taken out.
And real quick, before we proceed, I just want to talk about what the consequences are if, let's say, we do become insolvent. Or if for some reason, we end up in a situation where we're not paying our bills and God forbid LAFCO comes in and hits us with a hammer and says, we're not doing our job. There have been many questions I've received over the last 5 years of what would happen if we chose to unincorporate, or what would happen if we chose to do away with our sewer services. Well, the reality is there are still people who live here, and those services still need to be provided. And the county is not going to come in and say, that's okay, guys, we got you. We'll absorb it. That they don't do it that way. What happens is a special tax is assessed. And every parcel within our jurisdiction would be responsible then for the cost of the services previously required to be provided by the city. We would lose our local control. We would lose our say. We would lose any control we have over trying to get these rates down. And we would be at the mercy of the county to assess what they think it costs to provide these services. So I just want to make sure that we understand that context as we go forward, because there are some very severe financial penalties to not doing our job.
Well, it gets bigger than that. I've spent the last 25 years of my life working in sewer. And what will happen is if you don't have a rate structure that can support your sewer facility, the state will come in, evaluate what it costs to run your sewer facility, and they will raise your rates without asking you. And they will not give you a choice. And they've done that before. They have a small track record of it. It hasn't happened very often, but it has happened. So it's better if you have control of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very similar to, we got slapped on the wrist in 2008, but if they wanted to full on put us in cuffs, that's what it would look like. And we're definitely under the microscope.
If you were to get enough signatures where the rates couldn't be increased, where would you go to for funding?
We would risk insolvency.
Yeah.
Because we do not have the right to bypass the voters in that way. We would do our best with our current funding strategies. We would do the best we can with the structure we have and the grants we can get a hold of. But I can tell you that every effort that exists under the sun that we're aware of is currently in our pursuits. And if we do not have this very difficult conversation with our voters and have a very transparent, heart to heart about what needs to be done, if our voters tell us no, the answer is no.
So that would put us back to where I said, if we did maintain our facility, the state would come in and decide a rate structure for you to maintain a facility once it got to a level of decay.
Can I make a comment? We haven't come to a decision yet. So please don't assume that. And the reason I came here is to hear from you. That's why we're here. So please, I just want to invite people to speak up and not just listen.
And to add to the answer to your question, we'd get the money from the general fund, which, because we'll have to pay until we run out of money. And if we take the money out of the general fund, that's all the other services. That's tax revenue that we get basically for the general fund. So
that's police, that's fire,
that's police, fire, everything else. Road maintenance. Yeah.
What little money we have for that.
So, there's.
Okay.
Yeah, if we don't get the money from the rates, it'll affect every other service in town. And we're trying to keep it as low as possible, even down to zero if possible. And even at the risk of drawing down the reserves a little bit, if we can. And
We're
still
actually not allowed
stay
to
comfortable.
directly tap into the general fund without a loan structure.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah, you'd have to borrow from your general fund.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, and we end up having to repay it in the end anyway.
so I think we have a question right over here.
No offense, but we've heard the same spill several years ago and we're still paying for it. What I would like to know is how much is in that reserve fund right today? How much is in that reserve fund that we've been paying for years? The amount.
Do you have it now?
Yep. Let's see, which page was that on?
Sure. Gotta flip through the pages real quick.
Because it's gonna sound like a lot until you start talking about how much it costs to do things and how much we're required to have in there by.
And then remember, we have to have some of that reserve fund to help offset the grants to pay for the grant money.
Yeah.
Because a lot, they just don't give you 100%. I can't read that.
Okay, so the projection by the end of this fiscal year is about 1.7 million in unrestricted reserves and about 1.8 million in restricted or designated reserves, meaning it has a purpose. So you've really got about 1.8 million that's been put aside for capital projects. A portion of that has to stay aside for the state that you can't touch. And right now, these projects, the $10 million in projects that the city is laying the cash out for right now. My understanding is the state is owing the city right now more than $1 million. So these reserves can get drained really quickly. It might bounce back again for some portion of it by the end of a fiscal year, but the city could end up in a tight spot at any point.
They definitely make us fight them very hard to get our money back. I'll put it that way.
Well, one of the things to remember is this money that's held in reserve is there to prevent us from being in the same situation. but yes.
Yeah.
And when there wasn't any, we could get our lower rates reduced. That's never happened.
Right. Well, the problem was, is unfortunately, they failed to do that.
What's the interest rate on the money reserve stuff?
It fluctuates with the market. So it depends on the current market rate. I think right now the current market rate is around 6%.
We have it in a money market.
Shauna, maybe you might be able to elaborate a little bit better on,
It's sitting in place.
yeah.
Is some of this,
Investment.
is some of the funds used, are they only used for the sewer plant now there? They're not used for any others.
They are for the sewer system as a whole. So the sewer system is very complex. You know, there are parts that are considered the responsibility of the homeowners, such as your sewer lateral, which connects you from your home to the main line. But all of those lines throughout the city are part of the system. And so we do have certain areas such as our pump stations, our manholes, our inflow and infiltration areas that need that consistent maintenance to make sure that we're not having higher operating costs than what we're actually servicing. So those reserve funds, we actually had an example, was it 2 years ago, where we actually had an issue out at our pump station and we were required to mitigate it. It was about $1 million worth of work, right? I want to say, it was the lift station off Pine. Yeah.
I live in Mint Creek, and as you know, some services we pay the same taxes as everybody else, and same sewer rates as everybody else. If the pump thing that services gets the sewage out of there, if it was to fail, would the city be paying for it and fixing it, or would we be?
So I would have to,
Is that a private or a?
that's where we would have to defer to that.
It's an HOA, so if it's in an HOA, that's private, that's not part of the.
Well, Mint Creek's a little weird and I don't know for sure. We're gonna need to follow up on that one because Mint Creek's, the subdivision agreements for Mint Creek, like your road and your utility services are extremely unusual. So Sean might have some more details.
I
So
do want to say one thing. This group. We had nobody care, like when it snowed, nobody cared if we got plowed out. I appreciate everything that all of you guys can do to help us because we're not rich. And if huge things like that happen and we have to be responsible, then it will bankrupt us. And if certain things aren't covered, then we shouldn't have to pay as much money. We should be able to pay into a fund to be able to pay to fix those things rather than pay as much sewer fees as everybody else.
So I'll have to double check on the exact ownership of the lift station itself, whether we're responsible as a city, but for your underground, your sewer pipes, basically everything under the roadway inside of Meat Creek until it ties into the main sewer line is the responsibility of the HOA. And that was the agreement that the HOA or that the developer came up with the city so that they could get permits to build homes. And finish it off. So they didn't finish a couple of things. So the city never took ownership of that. I don't know why the city ever let that happen and and it was basically because the developers took off with his bond that he was supposed to leave for the city to finish the work and left the homeowners and future homeowners stranded there. And the city has done nothing to, it has done nothing to try and pick that back up. I've been working on that for the last 5 years. How long have I been on council? So, right.
So we have, and you guys have access.
Yes,
Yeah.
we do.
Whatever it would take for us to be part of the city, full part of the city. If you guys can find a way we can do that, I would.
So
And I know many of us live in the.
you've gone through a couple of different property managers for the HOA, and that's who we've been dealing with. We've gone through a couple of city managers and community
But we've
service
definitely been on
directors.
the same page with you on this one for the
Yes.
last couple of years.
So, as we get Ron broke in, we will not leave that project to the wayside. We'll make sure that comes to his attention once he gets settled and is ready for more projects. Because right now we've kind of inundated him with learning all the new stuff about the city. So it hasn't been forgotten. We're going to continue to work on that to figure out what agreement we need to get between the city and the HOA and property management to take over the underground and some road control. Probably some sort of agreement between. But
So what was the rate percentage for the last 5 years? How much has that been? For the last 5 years. And so right
And it was
now,
automatic. That 2.45 was consistent. There was no, we're not going to do a rate increase this year. There wasn't any of that. It was just a cumulative, consistent 2.45 that was happening every year for 5 years.
so with the rate proposal right now, the 4302, will that be on top of the rate increase of 2.5% that has
No.
been in the past?
No, this is a new limitation that we're putting in place for the next 5 years, saying that at no point in the next 5 years would we exceed that 4% per year increase. And then it would be individually assessed every year based on our financial stability to say, are we able to do a rate decrease? Are we able to hold it where we are, or are we able to make a nominal increase based on our conditions? But it would put that limitation at no more than 4%, assuming that that's the option that proceeded forward.
Right, and just what I can hear, that sounds like a great proposal. It's flexible, but yet it does protect the city. So I think that's a great idea. With this rate increase and the lien be decreased with I'm gonna know. Okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that for me.
It has to go to operations. It has to go to the actual cost of actually providing the service. The loan is sort of our other backdoor punishment for our failure to do this in the past. So that's sort of a separate category of funding.
Okay. And just another possible comment on this. Is it possible, and I know that there's a cost to the city, but to change our billing from bi-monthly to monthly? Because first off, I think there's a perception when somebody gets the monthly bill, oh gosh, my bill has gone down. Because there's obviously a few people that don't even realize what's going on. And with the majority of the people that are here on fixed income, to have this bi-monthly, that $286 with the increase of the rate proposal is going up even higher. So this is just something I'm throwing out. I don't know if this can be dealt with.
So Tim, I currently have a proposal on the table to actually take our sewer rates and wrap them into the tax rolls for a number of reasons, including some potential administrative cost decrease. And then it would eliminate penalties. So right now, if you don't pay your sewer fee on time, you're incurring penalties. So if we were to move to a structure where we're putting it on the tax rolls, there would be no more penalties.
Yeah, that's another great option.
Right, and the pros with that is there's not the penalties. The cons are you have to remember to put the money back for your tax when your taxes come.
Yeah.
Well, unless you have an inbound account and it can be paid out.
But for those who don't, because I read a bunch of college studies on this and it's a mixed bag.
And you are allowed, you might not realize this, you are allowed to pay your taxes to the county as frequently as you wish. So that is another option. I was gonna say, is there any reason? There's no reason you can't pay monthly on your sewer bill currently. I actually do that. What I do is I have my bank cut a check to the city for a set amount every month. It's a little bit more than what I know is supposed to be due, so I don't mess it up because frankly, I don't have time to think about it. I don't want to think about it. It's miserable to think about. So they just send the check every month when I get paid directly to the city and Shanna takes care of it. And it's fantastic. That's one way to handle it. So you can pay monthly if that is what you choose to do. But we are looking at options to reduce penalties, reduce late fees, reduce administrative needs, and frankly, make this easier on people. And we're more than happy if you guys have additional options and solutions. We want to hear them so that we can make sure everyone else is educated, because again, if we do move to the tax rolls, there are consequences, like remembering to pay those bills and making sure you have the money for those bills. So we want to make sure we put processes in place and transparency in place to help people be successful. We don't want this to turn into a trap.
Yeah, I'm just glad to hear that you guys are pursuing something like that, because I think it does come down to a hardship on a lot of us, and automatic taxes would definitely help us out. The other thing too, and Sean, that you mentioned about, it sounds like economic development, and that is definitely what this city needs to create more revenue coming in. And what are you pursuing now? Because after living here for 10 years or so, haven't seen too much of that. I do realize, there are a few things, Best Western, but then on the other hand, you'll see other businesses leaving. So I think if we can get a handle or gain with the development, that will definitely start to offset what our tax rates would have to be in the future.
Yeah, you definitely have an economy of scale problem here. Just not enough users for the system to have a low rate. So for economic development, we're really almost bending over backwards to work with developers and people to start new businesses and develop subdivisions, hotels, whatever it takes. We have kind of a can do, we're here to help attitude when you come into City Hall. And we do a lot of hand holding to try to get people moving forward.
I have a couple of questions. One is the hotel. How is that coming along? Speaking of,
Is that the Colfax Hotel?
yeah,
They've submitted some preliminary plans and we're working with them and we hope to see their final drafts any day.
okay, so they actually are going to go forward.
But yeah, I've spent some time with the owners and working out the hiccups that they'd had. And we've come to some pretty mutual agreements, and then we've set the owners of the hotel up with the city planner, the building inspector, and the fire marshal in a meeting to work together so they could streamline the process and get all their questions answered and get the directions they needed. And they seem to be very amenable to all that.
And another question. We talked something. Can you tell me, like, tell me again, when you might be going to the plan, actually putting?
I think you're probably looking at 5 to 8 years for development on that.
You think that
what the
long?
engineers say, yeah. Because you have to do a pretty intensive study to make sure it
Really?
works out. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're talking about annexation and a lot of other, I mean, it's.
So there's a lot
During
of
that
issues.
time, we don't, when do we start paying the city for our sewer? After everything's done?
Yes.
Yeah, it's gonna be long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
It's a
at
good
that
process.
time, it was mentioned that it's possible to be 55 and over place. It could be a rate.
We're not allowed to do fixed rates. for
No, and
specific-
any rate structure in that would be part of the study. So we won't know anything until they finish the study, if Shady Glen decides to move forward with the study. Well, we hope they will, because you don't really have a lot of choice in Shady Glen. No good ones anyways.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
They will be dug up my street 3 times because of the sewer, electric law. Yeah. If they were up there painting lines again today, are they gonna dig it up again? I'm on North Star and
Sure, why not?
yeah.
Maybe we could dig up one of the other good parts of the road.
Yeah, generally, once they do the striping, we hope they're not gonna dig up anymore. Usually when you get to striping. Oh,
No, these are blue lines showing water lines.
oh, well, that's a water company that's digging up the sewer,
They've already dug it up 3 times.
yeah, you'd have to contact the water company, ask them why they keep doing that. That's their pipes and their issues.
Is it ever gonna get paid?
Yes. This year, right? This year.
Straight,
I don't have to look.
which street?
That's part of this project.
You're about to get a brand new road. That's this year. So let them dig it up. This is the time because you're about to get a brand new street. And once we put in that new road, nobody better be asking for a permit.
No, yeah. I've talked with the water company and made sure they're working with the engineer here at the city to do everything they need to do before we pave any of the roads between the I&I project and the CDBG project for paving. So they've assured us at this point that they will be done before we pave, so they don't have to dig them up.
So they might dig it up 4 more times real quick.
Yeah, well, they need to practice.
We gotta get it out of the way.
Yeah, the new lines you're seeing might be the sewer lateral connections that they're cleaning up. They might need to dig there.
Yeah,
Or if they're just, they may be marking the water lines. PCD may be out marking water lines, but we might not be digging them up. It might be still for the I&I project.
could be.
This is USA.
USA, yeah.
Yeah. I know they still have laterals to complete, so that might be what they're doing up there, getting the last of those done.
Yeah.
Sure will.
I've got a couple of questions. Sorry, Bob. Unless you want to go first. A couple of things. One, it says on here that if you write a protest letter, that it's by partial.
Yes,
So if I own by partial, I've got 2 houses and 5 letters.
how's that work? If he owns 5 parcels?
Oh, 5 parcels. You can write a protest for each parcel.
For each parcel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I hope everybody realizes.
Yeah, every parcel gets a voice, 1 voice per parcel. So even if you personally own multiple parcels, you get multiple opportunities.
Okay.
On your 5 parcels, you have sewer on all 5 parcels?
Pardon me?
Are you connected to city sewer for each 5 parcel?
Nope.
Then no, only for the
By partial.
only for the parcels connected to sewer.
That's not what it says.
So if you have multiple parcels connected to sewer, then yes.
Yeah.
Like a hotel is on 4 city lot. One connected.
Well, only one's connected into the system. Yeah, yeah, they only have one. Yeah, they only have one connection.
I think the idea there is that people who have septic are not supposed to have, the ability to tamper in the services they're not paying for. So, or undeveloped lots would not have a say in a service it's not paying for.
Pretty much. If you get a bill, you get to write it.
Exactly. Yeah. One letter per bill. If it's 2 parcels with 2 separate connections. If it's 1 parcel with 1 connection, then no.
Whenever you're ready, I have a second question.
Okay.
Yeah, wait
Go
till
for
you're
your
ready.
next question.
Okay, years and years and years and years ago, we talked about sending the sewer down the hill. I believe it's,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a feasibility? Is that feasible? Is it a possibility?
Presently, no. I would imagine in 15 or 20 years, when you look at having to replace your sewer plant, then that would be considered. I know that that's what they're gonna do in Paradise, is they're gonna not build a sewer plant, they're gonna run it down to Chico. So, the state would like you to regionalize everything, so again, in a couple of decades, when your sewer plant is.
I'll hang in
Yeah.
I can tell you, at least the sentiment from me as a council member is if we got hit with, we need a new sewer plant, I would not be supportive of building a new sewer plant.
Right.
It's a stranded asset. I can tell you right now, if I had been on council in 2008, I would have been pushing for us to pipeline it.
Right, because then you'd have an economy of scale.
And I think that you're gonna find that across this room, everybody in here is dealing with a little bit of that frustration of things should have been done different, and that's why we're here trying to solve the problem, because I don't think any of us are very happy with the way things have been done.
Go for it, Foxy.
It's an unusual question that I've been through with. I'm on one of 7 roads in the city that is considered private.
Okay.
But a few years ago, I was the first house up on this doctor for Grand heating. Then 2 other homes came in and they connected my sewer going down to the business street. And when anything went wrong, I had to pay the bill. Because the city told me because I was at the top of the line. I had to pay the bill.
Sounds like we need to remap.
Yeah,
They connected in my
Yeah.
line, but when they broke their lines, I had to pay part of their bills.
So in the electric world, we would call that a distribution asset because what used to be a dedicated asset for just you became a service point for multiple people. And in my day job, how we would handle that is that you would no longer have that responsibility. It would become part of the main system. It would become a distributed asset. So it sounds like there's a mapping issue where you live and maybe there was permitted interconnection that probably shouldn't have been permitted the way it was. If this is still an existing problem, it sounds like we need to take a look at the mapping.
But apparently it's not, to my chagrin, I found out the other day, it's not that unusual
Yeah.
to have multiple houses on a lateral
Yeah.
running down there, and then every house after your house has prescriptive rights to have the pipe there.
Mhm.
And I had never seen that anywhere before till I got here, so it's kind of neat.
Probably need to do some reclassification.
Apparently,
So
it's right there.
where that would normally be considered a sewer lateral, I think that the solution here is we're gonna, it might even require an ordinance, I hope not. But we're gonna need to look at reclassification and remapping because that's a distributed asset at this point.
That's what would fall, Meat Creek would fall under, and Gearhart is another road that is, the entire road is private because the developer had a handshake deal with whoever was running the city back in the day. And was able to, they were able to put the houses in all on one party line. So all the sewer from the top to the bottom runs down one private line.
Yeah.
And it's, then each homeowner, wherever it breaks, they're responsible for it, or they have to figure out amongst themselves how they're gonna fix it. And that's actually come up a few times since I've been on council with that being an issue where they've had a sewer leak there and nobody wants to pay for it and we have to figure it out or split the cost between all the parcels and just charge it.
Have any problems right now that,
Right. We're gonna work on evaluating that more too, on trying to get some of these city assets that aren't currently owned by the city back into the city. I've been trying to figure out a way to do it, but when you can't pay for the stuff you already have, that you're already taking responsibility for, it's hard to convince people to find a good way to bring in these other things inside the city, like the sidewalks that.
Micro special
property
districts.
owners,
So from Gerhart, we're actually looking at, if the state may pay for us to put a sewer main up that, and then we'll get an easement down the middle of the road, so we have access to it. But, nothing's set in stone yet.
So maybe we can find a couple of projects and roll those together and ask for more from the state.
I've got another question. Years and years and years ago, we were told that the sewer problem with the sewer plant, is all the intrusion of rainwater. We had so many leaky underground pipes in the town. It was going into the sewer, causing them to have to clean all the rainwater along.
Mhm.
So apparently we went through the city. I remember they came through my property, relined all our sewer pipes, dug up sewer pipes, did all this. Did it do any good?
I couldn't, I can't tell you what happened years ago. I can tell you presently we are, doing an I&I project, which is, infiltration for, the rain in there. And they've, replaced leaky manholes in total units, done a lot of line repair. And I will have to wait and see next winter how much difference that makes, but the engineers are projecting quite a bit, but that's just numbers on paper.
Sean can speak to that. We just went through one.
Half of the water going through the sewer plant. So if we
Yeah.
could eliminate that, it seems like that should bring the cost down.
Yeah, the chief's back there. He can comment on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, depending on how many years ago it was, since we built the new plant and like you said, Fire Hester is currently doing a lot of that I&I repair stuff. And that really involves, lining a lot of the pipes, so any of the breaks or loose or our paper, has been replaced, or being replaced. So, like you said, the engineers are planning what's called quarter one turn down. Which essentially means we should be getting at least 20 to 30% less I&I, which is quite a bit. So which is a huge upgrade for us. It also means we have that much more capacity in the city at our wastewater plant currently. It doesn't touch the cost. No, it just means we have a little bit more room because we don't have to process so much rainwater. I is called infiltration and inflow.
Yeah, I worked out there 20 years ago at the sewer plant. Closed 2.2 million during the rainstorm. And after the rain stopped, rained at 2.2 for several days. During the drenching rain, what was our highest flows now?
With the most recent rains, sorry, with the most recent rains, we're usually getting around 1 million,
Yeah, so
which is
the
quite a lot less.
I that we've done these last 20 years really.
And anytime we're processing water, we don't need to be processing. We are throwing money down the toilet for all intents and purposes because we're using chemicals, we're using operation, we're using hours, we're using resources we don't need to be using. So, you know, whether directly or indirectly, us eliminating this unnecessary water inflow, we're saving assets. So there's definitely a financial benefit to preventing that inflow.
I wouldn't say it's lowering costs right away, but it is helping preventing the need to continually raise costs. I mean, we've got it down to the point where we didn't have to do an increase this last cycle. So we're right on the edge of being able to really support it well, but with costs continuing to go up and everything, trying to get that flowing in, we're doing the best we can to try and balance that.
All right, well, as long as I have the microphone, I have.
Go for it.
Looking at this, the expense, 47% going to personnel. Occupancy is 14%. What's that?
The utilities.
That's electric.
Electric, yeah.
Okay.
We put waste, solar at the waste. Hasn't. Cost saving.
So what's the dollar number on this? What's like personnel 47%? What's that?
I'm gonna break down here.
My revenue requirement.
Are you wanting to know how many people it's paying for or how much the dollar amount?
The dollar.
The dollar amount?
No. And the reason I'm, you know, bringing this up is when I worked out there, I know people in the office got part of their pay. Like the city manager had a huge amount of his pay came from the sewer plant. When I worked for the county, I know sewer plant funds were used throughout the county by you know, manipulating the numbers, I guess you might say. When I worked at the city, I got paid out of the sewer budget because I go out there 2 days a month.
Right, so anytime you spend doing anything at the sewer plant or as the staff here process the sewer bills and everything, that all will come out of the enterprise fund.
Yeah, I get that. I'm just.
But that, to your point, Tom, that those numbers we're looking at there, that's based on today, and that is not incorporating the operational changes that we've discussed, such as assessing to the tax rolls, which takes a huge administrative burden out of there, so therefore staff time out of that pot, potentially lowering that number.
Right.
You know, our city manager, we are very fortunate. We have a class 5 sewer operator right here. I have to say, I'm absolutely thrilled because that does to take additional operating and staff costs down from where we were previously, because anytime that our lovely chief over here was not available, we would have to bring in a third party, which was unbearably expensive. We now are fortunate enough to have that under our umbrella here. So there are some pretty significant changes that are yet to be seen in these numbers.
So, and that's why we said up to a dollar amount, because as the solar comes online, as the I&I works out, we'll have to evaluate every year and see what that costs.
So, this is a technical issue. Are we still using like a carbon source in that? Yeah, we hope that's not all micro seeding. Are you using less of it because we're having more
I use less of it because, we're getting around Iowa. Okay, so once less flow, then we manage it.
Yeah.
So for the audience, microseed means we don't have enough food or biological activity coming into the plant for it to run, so we have to add a little food to it to get it to run properly.
Yeah, because the engineers overbuilt that plant.
Right. Which is good for expansion, but bad when you don't have enough, and I've worked in multiple plants where that's been the problem.
All right, so do you have a number on?
Yeah. Yes, so the operating expenses for 2024 is about $1.5 million. And of that, about almost 700,000 of that is personnel costs.
Okay. Three.
Next. Do the Jeopardy thing.
Yeah, go on, keep the questions coming. I know you guys have got some more. I see you talking with each other.
And I'm sure you guys are sick of my voice by now. Unfortunately, I need to boogie out of here and get my children to bed, but I thank you for your time and I will pass it over to my fellow council members.
Okay, any final call for public comment? Any other call, public comment?
That's not kidding.
We're all available online, email, phone, or anything like that too, if you have other questions you think of.
Any comments from the council? Well, we got to go by. Any comments from council? There's no further comment. Meeting is adjourned. Go home and pay your sewer bill.
Hey.